Parliament resumes this morning with the election of the new Speaker on the agenda. Now, the position became vacant following the recent appointment of Thandi Modise into the Cabinet. The ANC has nominated former Defence Minister Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula as the new Speaker. The position is expected to be contested, but the Economic Freedom Fighters has indicated that they will not participate in the election of the Speaker. Our reporter Abra Barbier is in Parliament monitoring that story for us, and she joins us from the precinct of Parliament. A very good morning to you, Barbara. Thank you so much for joining us. Please set the scene for us. Just how ready is Parliament to elect the next Speaker?
And a very good morning to you as well. Yes, Parliament is up and running. It's ready to go. And as I was saying earlier on today, there are so many layers to today. It's not just the election of a Speaker of the National Assembly. It's also the first time in more than a year that we will have all MPs on the precinct. Of course, due to COVID regulations, Parliament has largely been doing its work virtually, and when they were having sittings, there would be a percentage only of MPs in the House, and the rest would be part of they would be joining the proceedings on virtual platforms. But to speak to us more about exactly what we can expect today from an administrative point of view, I have the Secretary to the National Assembly, Mr. Klaso. Mr. Klaso, thank you so much. Always availing yourself to us to help us educate the viewers about exactly how this process unfolds. You and I have done this a couple of times. Of course, not all our viewers are familiar. First of all, Parliament has also been through a lot. We've lost MPs, we've lost staff members at Parliament. So Parliament has been through quite a lot in the last year. Are you able to speak to us just about protocol? In terms of COVID regulations? We know that we're going to be using two separate venues today, which is different. But then can you just explain to us about the actual election process and the ballots and how that will play out in terms of safety?
No, thank you so much. Good morning, and good morning to SABC viewers. We have done everything possible to ensure compliance with the regulations. Firstly, members will be seated in 3 venues just to ensure that we are able to maintain proper social distancing. And during the voting itself, even the ballot booths will be sanitized. At every point before a member comes to the voting booth, there will be a sanitizing process that happens. And the point where you take your ballot paper, where your name is penciled out, take your ballot paper, and your ballot paper is stamped, we have separated those. Ordinarily, people would have sat at the same table, but we've made sure that we even there we maintain social distancing. So in terms of how members will sit in the House, we've even used what we refer to as firstly the gallery, which is used for the public. Members will be seated in the gallery, again to ensure that there's proper social distancing. We also have some bays called officials' bays in the chamber. Members will be seated there, again to ensure that we comply. So at every point of the process, there will be strict compliance with COVID regulations.
Mr. Klaso, Judge John Hlope of the Western Cape Division has been elected to preside over the proceedings today. Can you please just explain to us what is the role of the judge or the Chief Justice, who normally does this? What is the role of the judiciary official who presides over the proceedings?
All right. I just want to draw a brief distinction between what will happen today and what has happened at the start of a parliament. Now, because today the House is already constituted, you have an acting speaker, you have members of parliament. So the first person to take the chair will be the acting speaker. The acting speaker will then invite the judge president to take the chair. At that point, the judge president will then call for nominations. The Constitution prescribes that when a vacancy does occur in the position of speaker, the Chief Justice must conduct that process, or a judge designated by the Chief Justice to do so. In this instance, the acting Chief Justice has designated Judge President Hlope. So it's a prescribed process. Again, the Constitution prescribes that should there be more than one nomination, the vote must be by secret ballot. So there is no discretion in terms of the role that Speaker can play or the Judge President can play. That's what the Constitution prescribes. So if we do have more than one nomination, will go for secret ballot. But we'll only know that at 11 o'clock. I've made this point again, that what we know at this point are intentions by political parties to nominate candidates. But the actual nomination will only occur at just after 11 o'clock when the judge president calls for nominations. We are ready in terms of that process either way. If there's one nomination, the person nominated will be elected speaker. More than one nomination, voting by secret ballot, ballot papers will be printed. Of course, there will be a brief break there. Ballot papers will be printed, and we come back and members cast their votes, and they will be called in groups. The rules prescribe that members must be called to cast their votes, and members will be called to cast their votes in an orderly fashion. Starting with the members who will be seated in the main chamber, the National Assembly. Once we are done with the number of members there, we'll then proceed to the members seated in the gallery, and they will be ushered down, again called in an orderly fashion to come down. Once the gallery is done, we then proceed to members who are seated in another small chamber of Parliament called E249. Again, those members will be ushered down, and once that process is done, proceedings will then be suspended for counting of the votes. That process is presided over, even that process by the judge president. We'll use a separate room for that purpose. Only the judge president, the returning officer, who in this instance is the acting secretary to Parliament, assistant returning officers, which include myself and my colleagues in my division, will be assistant returning officers. Only those persons can be in the counting room. And once that is done, we then go back to the chamber, and the judge president announces the speaker, assuming that the numbers are there and the person is elected speaker. The sergeant at arms will then lead the speaker, will then go invite the speaker to take the chair, carrying the mace. And then the speaker takes the chair. The speaker is expected to say a few remarks in terms of the rules, and thereafter the business of the day is done. We have set aside up to 4 hours for the session. If it does go beyond that, there is no problem. It will. If we take less than 4 hours, good enough. But we have set aside 4 hours for the process to happen.
I like how you keep saying the word orderly when you're referring to MPs. It's like you're just trying to encourage our MPs. Orderly, please. We need order today. But I think today will run smoothly. We're not foreseeing any problems, and Parliament is, like you say, ready for anything.
No, we're not, certainly. And I've been asked the question elsewhere, the fact that there may be more than one nomination, if that presents a problem. No, that is part and parcel of parliamentary politics, constitutional democracy. Parties can nominate candidates. You can have one candidate, you can have two candidates, you can have three candidates. We are ready for any eventuality. So our anticipation is that the process will go smoothly. Of course, it's going to be different from what we have had before because of the current arrangements where you have 3 venues. So if there's going to be any challenge, it might be a challenge of the length of time it takes to do the whole process. Otherwise, apart from that, the time factor, we are not anticipating problems.
Mr. Klaso, thank you so much for speaking to us, and everything of the best for the rest of the day.
No, thank you.
Well, there you have it. Mr. Klaso, Secretary to the National Assembly, giving us a nice breakdown of exactly what will be happening in the National Assembly chamber today. He says the process, they are anticipating for it to last about 4 hours, but we'll see how the day plays out, because we do know that other parties will be putting forward names from their own parties who they will be nominating for the position of Speaker. Back to you in the studio. It is an election that will be closely watched.
Abra, we'll certainly touch base with you a little later on. Thank you so much for joining us and for that update. That was our reporter Abra Barbier speaking to us live from Parliament. And for more on this story, we now welcome Associate Professor at the Wits School of Governance, Professor Ivor Sarakinsky. Professor, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the agenda. It clearly is a very big day in Parliament today, not only because the Speaker will be elected, but because the ANC's nominated candidate, Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula, will not be getting the much needed support from the opposition. So how significant is today's election?
Morning to you and viewers. It's very significant in that the opposition have spotted a flaw in the whole process, and that is an ANC nomination and an instruction to ANC MPs to vote for a particular candidate. And that comes into conflict with the principle of MPs swearing allegiance to the Constitution rather than to a political party as soon as they become members of Parliament. So the controversy is political interference in terms of instructing MPs to vote in a certain way. And the opposition parties have spotted that, have picked that up, and of course they're going to mobilize and present alternatives in terms of making the process as complicated as possible. The important issue here is that it's a vote by secret ballot, as per the Constitution and as described earlier in your program. And that means that no one will ever know who voted in what way. And we know the ANC caucus is divided, and we wait to see the numbers in terms of how the ANC caucus votes in terms of this particular position. And the controversies around the candidate might result in people splitting from the instruction from the whip to vote in a certain way.
Well, the EFF, which is by far the second biggest opposition party, indicated that they will not be taking part in the election. Well, they may not be the biggest party with the numbers, but how big of a setback will it be for Mapisa-Nqakula's chances?
If the opposition parties or some of them choose not to vote, it is a setback for the status of the speaker, because you want a speaker that has broad support. And if the opposition parties don't vote and the ANC ends up having to use its majority in Parliament to ram through its candidate, the perception will be forevermore in terms of the term of this Parliament that the speaker is an ANC speaker. And the decisions will be contested on the basis of partiality rather than the speaker acting impartially. So this has not just short-term political implications, it has long-term implications in terms of the credibility of the decisions that Parliament makes. And it's a very, very serious matter.
Well, if for argument's sake she does indeed get the role, will the integrity of Parliament be tainted? I mean, being led by somebody who ostensibly does not espouse the principles of accountability and transparency required to lead the institution?
Well, this is one of the big controversies around the nomination of this candidate for the position. Someone who's been in the executive for 17 years, very little parliamentary experience, brought up in the culture of executive decision-making, being part of the executive, now coming into the legislature to perform oversight over the executive. And there may well be conflicts of interest here in terms of all of those historical dynamics that come through here. And that's another aspect as to why this candidate is controversial and unexpected. One would have expected a nomination to come from within the Parliamentary caucus, someone who's got years and years of experience in the committees, in Parliament, managing the Parliament, to come forward as a potential speaker. Whereas now we've got someone being pushed from the executive into this role, and it's not satisfactory at all.
We know that the office of the Speaker has been held by ANC members for decades now. Will this not, in hindsight, perhaps violate the integrity of Parliament in terms of decision-making? Because we know that it'll herald the transfer of decision-making powers from Parliament to the ANC leaders, who may be instructing its members or its MPs to act a certain way. I know you raised this before, but in terms of the integrity of Parliament and its decision-making prowess, because whatever decision has been taken will not be the decision that is held by a democratically elected Parliament by a specific party.
It's going to be difficult to ram through big decisions in that way. It's going to be in the fine interpretation of parliamentary procedure, where there are disputes between parliamentarians, where it comes to complaints, when it comes to parliamentary investigations, when it comes to portfolio committee reports being tabled before Parliament. That's where there's possibilities of partiality coming in terms of interpreting the way forward, and the Speaker's office is absolutely powerful in that regard. So I think that's what it comes down to in terms of weakening, whether it's in reality or in terms of perception, Parliament's ability to hold the executive to account. And we've been there, we've seen what this means. The ANC has nominated speakers that have performed well in Parliament as speakers historically. Not all, some haven't, as the Constitutional Court has ruled on the Nkandla matter with the previous speaker. But the previous incumbent did well to rebuild confidence in Parliament, and now we've got this highly politicized process of nominating a speaker with all the baggage, with all the controversy, with all the executive experience. That's making the situation very worrying.
Well, Professor, we certainly cannot ignore the reason why Mapisa-Nqakula was removed from, as Minister of Defence, and the role that the department played, and the statement and her remarks she made over the insurrection, or, the alleged insurrection in the country as a result of the looting and the violence that we experienced a few weeks ago. So how likely will this have an effect or an impact in terms of getting the necessary cooperation from members of Parliament?
It's a real problem. But the more serious issues aren't just her contradiction of the president on whether it was a counter-revolution or an insurrection. There's a track record of controversy in terms of allegations of human trafficking, in terms of abusing positions to get people onto planes that were connected to family members. Those are allegations. The Department of Defence, of which he was the minister, in short, has done more to contribute to Cuba's GDP than Cuba's export of rum and cigars. Controversial procurements of technical assistance for motor vehicles, and a very controversial medicine coming to many millions, if not billions of rand. And those are the really serious issues here in terms of accountability. The former minister hasn't been held to account for that. Now will be the Speaker of Parliament. And that means that if Parliament raises any of these issues, you've got a major conflict of interest in terms of resolving these issues in a transparent and accountable way. And I think that's what this really comes down to in terms of someone from the executive coming into the office of Speaker of Parliament.
So, Professor, are we likely to see the divisions within the ANC caucus playing out in the ballot box, with the ANC MPs voting for a different candidate?
Well, we wait to see. It's difficult to speculate because one doesn't know what the calculation is of the ANC MPs. We know that about 60 MPs are sympathetic to the RET faction in the ANC, and we wait to see whether they vote with the ANC as a whole, or whether other ANC members of Parliament break ranks and vote for other nominations. We're in new terrain here, a divided ANC caucus like never before, and it's very difficult to predict how that caucus is going to vote.
All right, Professor, great chatting to you. Thank you so much for your analysis. That is